So, hi guys. Could you introduce yourselves to us, please?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Flynn Devine. I'm 22, from the UK and part of the Global Assembly delivery team.
Global Assembly Delivery Team. We'll unpack that just now.
My name's Susan. I'm from Seoul, South Korea, and I'm also part of the delivery team of the Global Assembly.
Okay. So many words that I struggle with. So, what is a Global Assembly? First of all.
The Global Assembly is really a qualitatively new way of thinking about the way that decisions are made. And I heard you saying we need more people at the table, but I think the reality is we actually are building a new table to begin with. There's a key missing part in how decisions are made today at the global level, and that's an infrastructure that allows everyday people to take a permanent seat. And that table doesn't exist yet. And I think the Global Assembly could be said to be one attempt at building that table.
I love the concept. We built it so we don't need people at the table. We just need a whole new table. Throw out the table. Yes? So why is that? Why must we, and how does that look like? Explain to me with the concept. What are the practicalities of it? How can we get involved if we want to? What does it do? And what is the material this new table is made out of?
I think maybe what's closer is that we just need to build a bigger table. We don't have to throw out the one that's already there, but we do need to make sure there's enough seat for others to pull up a seat at the table. Maybe I'll let my colleague Flynn describe to you the practicalities of what this looks like.
Hold on, let me just go over here.
Well,
So, hi.
Hey, so the Global Assembly, what really is it? So the Global Assembly is the first ever citizens' assembly that's being done at a global scale. And so what this means is kind of some people watching right now might be members of this first ever Global Citizens' Assembly, so you've got to be top 4 because they're watching to learn. So really this has kind of 3 key parts, and the first key part is what's called the core assembly. So what this is there's this 100 people from around the world, different locations all around the world, and they are a kind of proportionally representative group of the global population by gender, age, education, attitudes toward climate and geography. So what this means is back in June we ran.
You're going too fast for my simple mind.
Oh.
How do I select these people? How do these people get to the table? As in, you say they're representative of the world, so how do they represent me, for example?
Yeah, great questions. That's kind of part 2 as well.
Oh, sorry.
You cut me off there.
No,
That's
so
totally
sorry.
fine. So the core assembly was designed using this multi-layered kind of selection process. So what happened was, using a NASA database of population density, we randomly selected, but weighted by population density, and that sounds a bit confusing, 100 locations around the world. And so what this means is we have kind of, China has around 18% of global population, and so they have about 18 points of the 100. And then we went in, recruited community organizations, these 100 points, and then they kind of recruited and hosted these participants, and it was kind of stratified, so it was proportionally representative of the world. So what this means is, essentially this core assembly is a snapshot of the global population. But we understand that obviously 100 people, and it's worth noting that this year is a prototyping year, and the idea is to scale this up to make a bigger and better global assembly moving forwards. But what this means is we have this 100 people as a snapshot, but then also there is a way that anybody on the entire planet can get involved by running their own community assembly. And so if people visit our website, globalassembly.org, they can download a specially designed toolkit that will talk them through everything they need to kind of set up this assembly, and gives them facilitation tips, it gives them community organizing tips. Then what they use is this information material booklet, which is the same information materials that the core assembly use, which has been specially designed by our Knowledge and Wisdom Committee, which is essentially this committee of knowledge and wisdom keepers from around the world. And what happens is these communities can go through their own learning journey, which is the same learning journey as the core. They can upload all of their own conclusions, everything will be locally contextualized by the people running it, and then their outputs will be included alongside the outputs of the core assembly in our big report coming out in March 2022.
So, a satellite told you where the most, told someone where the biggest pockets of population are, and those are the ones that get represented. But what happens to those who are underrepresented, where there is no dense population, like indigenous folk? I mean, where does that play into the whole thing?
Yeah, and so the selection was weighted by population density. That meant the largest areas of population were almost guaranteed places, but then actually a large number in the assembly also come from countries that have under 1% of global population. So when it came to kind of those selections of countries, that was randomly selected. So kind of the selection criteria meant that in theory anybody on the planet could be chosen. But then also what's really kind of key is that we really want to push these community assemblies so the people that can't enter this core assembly for this year can still be represented. And also through the Knowledge and Wisdom Committee, for example, we have First People's Wisdom Keepers who have been involved in the kind of creation and curation of the information materials and the framing question, alongside people such as Professor Bob Watson, who was the ex-chair of the IPCC. And so it's really about kind of creating an equal balance of kind of Western science and kind of other ideas of knowledge, other forms of wisdom from around the world. And then we also have a selection of speakers and a selection of kind of key witnesses who've come in throughout the process to kind of really bring as many diversity of voices as possible to the members of the core assembly. But then really importantly is we really want everyone around the world to run their own community assembly so everybody's voice can be heard.
So a global assembly is essentially, if you allow me, an international assembly, citizens assembly, yes? Could you maybe explain what a citizens assembly is as opposed to an assembly, a legislative assembly, or a people's assembly? Because it's a bit of a mess in my head. I'm not too sure if I understand it.
Yeah, there is a lot of lingo being thrown around, and I think the key thing to focus on is that this isn't actually a new idea. Citizens assemblies, it's a big word, but I think the idea is quite simple, and the first time I heard it, I thought it was the most common sense thing. It's when you gather a snapshot of any given populace. So for instance, at the global level, this means that around 18% of the global population is Indian. So it only makes sense to have around 18 members who are Indian, 50% women, similar levels of commensurate educational levels. And you gather the snapshot and you have them learn from experts, but also most importantly, each other. And from the plurality of sort of experiences and different types of knowledge that exist in that group. And once they're able to empathize from each other and learn from evidence-based science, then they deliberate and come up with solutions to the problems that affect them the most. And if you lay it out like that, I think it is quite common sense, and it's sort of a rational choice to be able to bring that into the other mechanisms we have of how we make decisions. And I think the question you asked Flynn earlier is a really great one, and it's one that we get a lot, which is how can 100 people be representative of the global population, right? I mean, statistically, it's not possible. It's statistically impossible. And I think the answer that Flynn gave about community assemblies being an alternative channel to bring self-initiated community events in is quite important. But I also want to ask people to imagine in your heads, what do your normative decision-making bodies look like? What do your parliament look like? What do the government buildings in your country look like? And the Global Assembly is still radically a departure from the demographic characteristics of our decision-making bodies today. And I think that's what I want people to consider.
What does that mean? Like a departure from, no, see, you lost me. That's much too sophisticated for my simple mind. Explain to me what you mean by that. Because how is it a radical departure from what we have? Explain it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, if you picture the politicians in your country, are 50% of them women, have 25% of them not had any schooling, are many of them illiterate. And I think in many cases of the viewers watching, and for myself and for many of us in this room right now, that would be a strong, resounding no. But for the Global Assembly, that's just a given. It's part of the process itself.
So you're saying that these people who could belong to it could maybe be illiterate people, or people who have no access to education and therefore don't have the knowledge. But one could argue, I guess, to play devil's advocate, that these people just don't have information. But that's where, you mentioned the word earlier, deliberation, the deliberation process. I guess that does that speak to that?
Yeah,
how does that work?
It's informed deliberation, I suppose, but they go on a learning journey first. So over the past 3 weeks, the Assembly kicked off on October 7th. The first thing the members do is go on a thorough learning journey about the reality of climate change. And this means listening to recorded videos from speakers and witnesses. For instance, Farhana Yamin spoke about fairness. We had a witness from an indigenous community in the Cook Islands speak about how climate change is affecting them in their personal lives. And so hearing from different viewpoints to understand the issue holistically. And what happens when you get a snapshot of the world, listening to the same information rather than their different pockets of sort of Twitter streams that are polarized. What happens when you get them in one room, have them learn together and think about these issues collectively?
So you're saying that somehow by providing people with those who have been witness, who've experienced it, and maybe experts or scientists in the matter, you somehow level that playing field of knowledge and allow people to make an informed decision thereafter?
I suppose it's about learning together, and I mentioned experts and learning materials, but the most compelling moments of learning that I've experienced or observed in the assembly is when members learn from each other's lived experiences. There were two assembly members discussing with each other, and one of them simply couldn't understand why having too much rain would be a problem. And one of the other assembly members in that Zoom room were cutting in and out of connection because of flooding in his area. And it was simply a matter of that member going off mute to be able to share his experiences that the connection was instantly made. So it's about what happens when you get diversity together and you are able to compare and learn from each other's experiences.
So therefore, there's some kind of unity in that diversity. That's very beautiful. Now, tell me something. Did you guys unpack this for the COP today? As in, I understand you were in a plenary session, yes?
So we had our official launch event where we kind of officially launched the declaration that's come out of this Global Assembly, which is called the People's Declaration for the Sustainable Future of Planet Earth. We launched that on November 1st in the Green Zone. And so the event we've just had in the Blue Zone there, we actually had two events, and one of which was two members of the Assembly itself talking alongside members of other citizens' assemblies that have taken part over the last couple of years. And then the other session was actually about how to kind of increase public dialogue and kind of increase the participation of people from all around the world in kind of decision making, which Susan was speaking at. And so our official kind of launch event was on November 1st, which everyone should be able to watch on our YouTube channel, Global Assembly. But yeah, we've been kind of going to multiple different events.
One second, just globalassembly.org, you said?
So globalassembly.org is the website, yeah, and then we also have a Global Assembly YouTube channel.
Right. .org. Is it just called Global Assembly?
It's just called Global Assembly on YouTube, yeah.
Right. Thank you.
But yeah. So that's it. So we kind of officially launched this declaration on Monday. We had a couple of stories about us, and we've kind of been talking to different people all throughout COP, getting responses, and really. So what's important about COP itself is that actually we're meeting up again afterwards, and by we, I just mean the Global Assembly, not me personally, but the Assembly members. So what's going to happen is once COP is over, the Assembly members are going to reconvene. And at the moment, they're all observing the COP process. That's what I meant earlier when I said some might be watching us right now. So they're going to be watching a mix of Green Zone events, Blue Zone events, press stories, other things going on around Glasgow. The Assembly will be meeting again after COP, and they'll be looking at the entire COP process, giving their feedback on how they think it went. Do they think that the things coming out, for example, the different leaders' sessions, were matching the proposals that they put forward in their declaration? Kind of how do they think the COP process has gone as a whole? Could the COP process actually deliver what they believe needs to happen? And then also kind of helping to co-design what will happen in the next Global Assembly, kind of moving forwards, and the Global Assembly as an institution moving forwards.
So you just presented this at the Green Zone and at the Blue Zone. Sorry, excuse the question, but how on earth did you get into COP? As in, like, how did that happen? Who made that happen? It just seems to be, especially when I come from the street where people are saying, "Hey, don't listen to us," and here you are promoting this thing that is quite radical in the sense that it's new, unseen, and it's, to my naive mind, it sounds amazing. I'd like to study a bit more, but what you're telling me sounds pretty. How did you get in here? I mean, if you got in here, that means that someone is listening to you, or you got great connections, either or. Tell me about that. How did you get there? And that's not a bad thing,
Yeah, I mean, do you wanna?
I think practically we have 3 steering governance committees.
Mm-hmm.
So a sort of staple part of citizens' assemblies is that the initiators, which for this year is our core team, including Flynn and I have a degree of separation from how the process is designed. And so, for instance, Flynn was mentioning the Knowledge and Wisdom Committee, which is a group of scientists and Indigenous wisdom keepers who designed the learning journey. That's one steering committee. The other is the Institutional Advisory Board. And so that consists of members from UNFCCC, Scottish Government, who mainly are interested in us because of the precedents of national Scottish climate assemblies that have happened in this past year. And it's about us liaising with them to figure out how does this new infrastructure fit into what already exists. Normally, when you initiate a citizens' assembly, someone is telling you to do it. For instance, the climate assembly that happened in France, Macron commissioned that assembly. There was a political mandate coming from the top for citizens to get involved into a citizens' assembly. At the global level, who's going to give that mandate, right? There's no global superpower to be like, all right, 100 citizens gather and do a citizens' assembly. Rather, for this year, the Global Assembly is a claimed space. No one told us to do this. We just did it. And so this means that we don't have a political mandate to respond to. Rather, it's the members who are responding only to the mandate of the common good. And I think this sort of speaks to your question, which is that a key thing I want to underline is this is a everyone movement. And so we were in green zone, we were in blue zone. The whole time we were in the green zone, our key message was listen to the side of the river too. But really, the sort of ethos of the Global Assembly is that we're listening to both sides of the river and we're able to connect them. And there's a piece in this Global Assembly for everyone.
You know, I love that when you say listen to the river too, are you speaking about the River Clyde or generally, is it a simile? Is it a metaphor?
Well, we were just across the river from the world leaders in the green zone on November 1st.
I wanted to just, but it's beautiful. It fits into the whole, like, you know, listen to the river too and listen to both sides of the river. So, because one of the things that we're going to have an interview, I'm going to launch a bit in a little moment, is there was at the same time in the past 2 days an indigenous tribunal which actually tried to, shall we say, personify elements of nature, because the one voice that is truly missing, here you are, youths that are at the table. The damn carts don't stop all day long. It's like, oh, you got youth at the table, kind of. But at least, you know, you're acting an active presence, as they say. You got some indigenous folk walking around. It shows that image. But I don't see a river walking around. I don't see a mountain walking around. I don't see a rainforest walking around. And that, perhaps, that when you say, listen to the river as well. Does this system also listen to the river in that sense? It's particularly what you said, quite literally, and take it to that level. To our mother, the earth. How does that play into that?
I think you're talking about different ways of understanding nature and different ways of seeing the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's what you mean, I would say that's center stage of what the Global Assembly is. It's all about, you know, people who have never heard nature being described as Mother Earth. And for instance, when that topic came up in our deliberation or discussions, that was the most emotive part, I think, from an observer's point of view of the members' conversations, because you see the different worldviews that the members are bringing in start to rub up against each other and start to merge. You know, some of our members took issue with the idea of Mother Earth, nature being personified, because they felt that it was placing care labor on a feminized word. Others were shocked because they had only viewed nature as sort of, you know, rocks and rivers that didn't really have anything to do with their personal lives. And it was the first time that they had heard other assembly members describing nature as a Mother Earth. And so it's a space where those kinds of granularities of different ways of seeing the world can come together, collide, and produce different outcomes that we didn't expect.
But now, my question here is, how do you get the powers that be to relinquish even a modicum of power and allow that process to work? Because until they say, okay, fine, we'll listen to you, then what's the point?
So yeah, I think kind of something Susan said earlier is really important in this point, that this wasn't something that was started under the premise of someone telling it to happen. This was something that was started from the ground up with civil society, citizens, scientists, kind of a huge group of like deliberative democracy experts from all around the world. And so the idea is this has started from the bottom up. And actually, you know, this is probably the most common question we get asked is, how can you guarantee something's going to happen, right? How do you imagine this making a change? How do you imagine world leaders listening to? And the first thing I would say is, you know, world leaders already are listening to us. You know, we had an endorsement by Alok Sharma, who's the president of COP26. We have endorsement by Antonio Guterres, who's the General Secretary of the United Nations. Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, came to our launch event and spoke at our launch event. So kind of we do already have that support, but I think the way we view it is it isn't just about, it's not understanding power as a top-down political mandate, you know, nation state says, and this happens. Mm-hmm. It's a different kind of power. So I guess you could almost imagine it in sort of like a three-pronged event, a three-pronged kind of way of creating change. And so one is kind of, you know, mass kind of pressure. So an interesting thing to do with climate policy is generally leaders are kind of reluctant to kind of suggest huge changes and, you know, ask the people who have elected them to make big changes in their life to kind of counter climate change. But actually, they do this because they're afraid that they won't get re-elected. If I ask too much of the people who voted for me, I won't get re-elected. This actually flips it on its head. And actually, the Global Assembly provides a mandate for leaders to make the difficult decisions that kind of the Assembly members think they need to make. And so actually, it flips it. And instead, if you have this huge pressure to make these changes, then actually, they'll be afraid they won't get re-elected if they don't make these changes. Then kind of second is sort of, mobilization. This, is a middle ground for kind of the institutions that kind of already hold a large part of the kind of decision-making power, but also everyone around the world. This is a middle point for everyone to come together. And so really this is also about mobilization. It's about sort of where community assemblies come into play. How do you have people from all around the world learning the same things, but also learning it in their own ways, having similar deliberations, but completely different deliberations, and creating a mass movement around one thing. And then also it's also about education. The idea of us creating a specially curated learning journey about this with inputs from kind of, scientists in climate science, from First Peoples, wisdom keepers. The idea is if you create this curated journey and do something that allows anybody on the planet to go through this journey, then that's going to create mass education, creates awareness. I think there was something that one of the assembly members said actually at our launch event, which was kind of awareness and deliberation is love. So it's the idea that actually everybody becoming aware of this at the same time, everybody kind of going on the same learning journey, understanding these issues in the similar ways, kind of creates this sense of this love and understanding. And so I think it pushes power in multiple ways, and I think it kind of flips the idea of political mandate on its head a bit. And it's really, the idea is to create this as a permanent piece of international governance infrastructure that would sit alongside the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the IMF, and actually create a permanent forum for people to have a permanent seat at the decision-making table.
And what language is it in? Sorry, just a thought that occurred to me.
Yeah, and so basically the way that we've designed it means that each person has their own translator. So, for example, you didn't need to speak English to take part in the assembly. We didn't want that to be any prerequisite for being selected. Anything to do with education, having access to internet, speaking any language. This year, the kind of transitionary language is English, because when the Knowledge and Wisdom Committee, the most commonly spoken language in the Knowledge and Wisdom Committee is English. So it was the easiest language to co-design the information materials in. And so what this meant is the information materials were written originally in English, and then they were provided out to these community organizations that I mentioned earlier, who are supporting the assembly members, to be importantly translated, but also contextualized. So they ran sessions with members of their community to go through it as a whole, as a community. And, for example, when they hit a point and when they hit something being discussed that they wouldn't understand, they would talk about it. And they would kind of, add local stories when, they might not understand that our precipitation levels are changing. People might not understand what that means. So what they would say is, we know how we've been struggling with our farms for the last 5 years because the rain normally comes in April, but now it comes in June. It's adding these local stories, these local understandings, kind of creates a myriad of languages talking about the same thing. And so the core language was English, but this was instantly spread out and translated and contextualized into all of the languages of all of the assembly members.
Okay. And so I take it that this global assembly is geared towards climate change, or the climate and ecological emergency. How would that look? Shall we say, for argument's sake, we adopt it, the world adopts it, and so yay, global assembly. Now what happens? How do we stop climate change with that?
I think the next step for us is figuring out how we can make this assembly even more owned by the assembly members. So you're right, this year the topic is climate change, and this year the framing question was set by the Knowledge and Wisdom Committee, our steering committee. But going forward, we want this process to be completely initiated, co-designed, and agenda set by members themselves. And so Flynn was talking about how the members are observing COP. And that's one thing I really don't want us to gloss over, which is I would really want everyone watching to know that the members are watching. They're each observing at least 8 hours of COP, and they're seeing if what they're observing is aligned with the discussions that they've been having. So that's what they're doing now. And in November, later this month, they're going to come back and continue deliberating and have the opportunity to invite witnesses and speakers they saw at COP to be able to interview them in person over Zoom in the assembly space.
As part of a deliberation process.
Exactly. And so, it's members keeping the speakers they saw accountable. It's not rocket science. It's something that is, again, completely common sense, but like most common sense things that don't exist, groundbreaking. And after they do this, the last leg of deliberation for this year is going to be agenda setting. So the last thing the members are talking about this year is what should a global citizens assembly be deliberating on going forward? And so we're not the ones making this decision. It's the members who are going to be the pilots of the process going forward. And it's up to them to decide how the assembly is going to be structured, what's the framing question, and what are the members of the next Global Assembly deliberating on.
But who decided they would decide? My question is like, how did they get there apart from the deliberation process? Where does this original idea come from? Is there precedent for it?
I think there are different members of the team who carry different inspirations, and this is, again, just a hallmark of the team being quite diverse. I think for me, my biggest inspiration, if I had any part in the shaping of this opening up of the process to the assembly members, are the itinerant assemblies that you see being taken place in Colombia. And it's run by IDEMOS, which are one of our cluster sort of regional leads in the Global Assembly. And the idea is that one Citizens Assembly sets the agenda for the next Citizens Assembly that's going to be convened a few months later. And so it's not citizens being secondary collaborators to processes that are designed elsewhere. This is exactly what we want to move away from, but figuring out smarter and more creative ways of allowing participants of these kinds of processes to own it completely from top to bottom.
So has COP26 been useful in terms of what you guys are trying to establish? Would you ban COP? Would you say that this COP is a failure, like Greta just said? How do you feel about it?
I think, I think what's important is that it's not up to Susan or I to kind of describe what the Global Assembly has thought of COP. Because really the Global Assembly isn't us. We're just here because, we could get here. The Global Assembly is the members. And so this is exactly kind of what's going to be so important about the next stage is them looking back at COP, them kind of evaluating COP, them, imagining what COP could have been like. Do they think it's done enough? Do they think that it's kind of followed their declaration? So this is the entire kind of idea of this next, 18 hours of deliberation, I think. Or is it longer? What, 30? 32 hours of deliberation. She does more process work than me. But so really this is what's so important is that, we're here for COP and we're here to, present, their declaration. We're here to meet people. We're here to talk on panels like we've just been doing. But it's not up to us to decide whether COP is a failure, whether COP is, great. That's everything we do is kind of in service to just what we want to do is we create the space. They fill the space and, we guide them as best we can, for example, with creating, committees that create learning materials, but it's really about them sharing their experiences, their own views, their own opinions. And so, we're just here to push, the idea of the Global Assembly, but the Global Assembly, all of the opinions will come from the members themselves.
Okay. And has it been useful in terms of promoting the concept of a Global Assembly to the world? Has this conference served as that space?
Yeah, and I think maybe by negation, which is that the main message that I'm hearing from people our age is a very affective one of just lots of anger and frustration, and I get that and I feel that as well. And the reason why I felt that COP has been useful for us is because we provide an alternative to channel that frustration, that emotion into a productive way, right? Because this is something that's so new, and it's also another infrastructure that we're pushing for. And I don't think my generation has actually seen infrastructure building and radical system change. And again, I say radical, but this is common sense, right? We've seen that the people who hold power today, the people that many in my generation feel disillusioned by, they've been through in their generation system change. The fact that the UN's existed for 75 years is testament to this. And I think what my generation is pushing for and calling for is something that is tantamount to that kind of radical global cooperation at a different scale that we in our generation haven't seen, but clearly, so clearly, we need now more than ever. And that's the only reason why I feel that this is something that really answers the call for my generation and is the logical next step in the journey that folks my age, being out on the streets, asking for change, this in a way is a response to that call.
Well, that's quite inspiring, I have to say. So, in the end, ultimately, do we have cause for hope or for despair, outrage? Because this seems to me like something that could work. But how do we make it real? And should I dare be hopeful?
So I think what we need is we need more people talking about it, and we need people out there running community assemblies right now. This is a direct way to have your voice heard. We need everyone to get involved. We need everyone to share this message, and whether we have hope or not, again, it's up to the assembly members to kind of look back on this whole process and see whether COP provides that hope or not. But this only succeeds if, like, the people watching right now decide to take action. This only succeeds if we all want to take action, and, you know, we really push for this to be something that becomes more permanent, becomes more listened to. You know, it's up to everyone listening to really get involved in this, I think.
Where did they go? Where did they have to go and visit? What was the website again?
So they go to globalassembly.org.
Globalassembly.org.
That's the one.
Okay. Final thoughts? Because I kept you here for quite a while. Hey, you must be.
I suppose just RSVP to the invite. If anything, this interview is more of an invitation than anything else. I'm sure, I mean, you've asked us some cerebral questions, but what's more important than those technical questions really is that people are able to look at what's available and decide for themselves to the question, you know, is this the best that we can do? And if your answer to that question is no, then this is an actionable alternative for you, and we invite you to join us and co-create this process, this alternative future with our team and with our assembly members.
Final thoughts, Flynn?
I think she summed it up really well.
Website again, please.
globalassembly.org. And you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. There's always going to be some variation of Global Assembly. I don't know all the handles, but we're about.
Just Google it.
Just Google it.
Right, guys. Well, thank you so much for what you do. And I've heard you guys were, you know, quite fantastic today. Mazel tov. And, well, you know what? Good luck. Good luck with that, what you're doing. And it's, you know, because it's for all of us, but especially for you. I wish you luck in your trip to change the world.
Thank you.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you.
And there you have it, from the mouth of babes, as we were talking, you know, and this is the leadership that we're looking to. And as I said to you guys this morning, this festival of climate change, outreach and optimism, I hate to steal your line, Christina, I'm sorry, but it's such a good line, actually allows for this kind of melting pot, this salad, because each ingredient keeps its flavor somehow. And yes, perhaps the voices are not at the table that need to be, but they're in Glasgow, and we get to talk to each other, and I get to talk to you, and that's beautiful.